recording. Hi, this is Beth from Around the Table Yarns, and tonight is the second night of the I'm So Basic Socks by Summer Lee for Sock Club. Spotlight myself for everyone because it's good if you can see me big. And the I'm So Basic sock from Summer Lee is a vanilla sock. It's really a fun pattern, I think. I'm going to show you a copy of it. So it's this pattern, and the pattern is available on Ravelry as a free download. So because of that, I will be able to show you some details from the pattern. What I like about this sock is that it is, it's a nice way to use two colors. I think it's always fun to have a contrasting heel and toe and cuff on a sock. So this is a nice way to use up a little bit of yarn if you have some leftover yarn for the heel and toe, but it's also a fun way to highlight if you have a hand-dyed yarn that you're sort of saving for something. It's a nice way to use that and still be able to maybe bring out some more of the colors or use a different color for the contrasting heel, toe, and cuff. So last time we cast on and we worked from the cuff, and then we started in the round. This is my sock, and we got to looking at my setup and realizing that my document camera is not sitting on my table because I just got back from retreat and my document camera is still in my bag. So I'm going to pause the recording while I get the document camera out. All right, we're back with the document camera set up. So I actually did mine a little bit longer than the pattern called for. So I think she suggests like 6.5 or 7 inches, and mine's just a little bit longer than that. And I used this, I used a yarn that's been in my stash for a while, and I'm really excited to get to use it for a sock finally. And then this is Uni Merino mini skeins that we have in the store, and I kind of like, I don't know that I would pick this color for the main event of anything, but it's sort of a pinkish brick red. And I thought it was really pretty with the rest of the colors in my sample. So what I'm going to do is show you first the technique that we use to do the slip stitch rib. That is, my yarn is stuck. All right, so here's my contrast color. And the slip stitch rib is worked on the second half of the stitches. So you'll have come to the beginning of the round and you can work half of the stitches. I'm using magic loop technique here, but you can work half of the stitches and be ready to work the second half of the stitches. The pattern information says to knit 2 for row 1, and then slip 1, knit 1, and turn work. So slip 1, knit 1 is in parentheses. That means you're going to knit 2 at the beginning, and then you're going to slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1 until you get to the other end. The last stitch will be a knit 1, and then you'll turn the work on those the half of the stitches that you just worked. When you slip 1, you are always going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in back. So please note that you will always be slipping the yarn purlwise. When you slip 1 at the beginning of the purl row, you can slip it with the yarn in front. So it's only the knitwise ones that the yarn is in back. The slip 1 at the beginning of the purl row, you can slip with the yarn in front. And it says that. Oh, look, it does say that right there. And then row 3 is slip 1, knit 1 across. So it's a little different from row 1, you'll see. And then she repeats rows 2 and 3. So that's just to get you going here. So let's do rows 1 through 3, and then we're going to move to the heel turn. So I'm going to join my yarn, but first I'm going to put my right needle in knitwise into the first stitch. To join my yarn, I just loop it with a tail of 6 to 8 inches, or 4 to 6 inches. And I just start the first 2 stitches, knit 2. I showed this in class today. I like to take the tail and lay it over the working yarn as I join a new color. So there's my knit 2, and then I like to do that again, lay it back the other way so that it's a little bit more secure. It won't pull out. I won't be able to pull on it after that first stitch. It's just an option. So I've knit 2. I'm going to slip my first slip 1. I slip it as though to purl and take it off the left-hand needle. Then I go knitwise into the next stitch and knit it normally, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1. We're going to do this all the way across. Slip 1, knit 1, until we get to the other side. What this creates is a fabric that is ridged. So it's a ribbing that is created by the slipping instead of purling of the other stitch. And we only do this on the right side of the fabric. And I can show you what that looks like in a second, because like Julia Child, I have one I started earlier. Okay, so you end with a knit 1. So when you come to the end of that row, the other half of the stitches are on the other half of your cable. You ignore them. You simply turn and you work back on the stitches that you just worked. So there's my stitches that I just worked, and you can see that they are interspersed with the main color and the contrast color, because this was the first row that we worked with the contrast color. After this, each of the rows will only be in the contrast color. Now I slip the first stitch purlwise. The yarn is in front because I am purling. This is the only stitch that is slipped. All of the rest of the stitches of this row will be purled. So I always think of this first, of the difference between row 1 and row 2, or row 2 and row 3, of a ridged slipped rib heel, is that it's like that book about the panda eats shoots and leaves. You have to pay attention to the commas here. So the commas are really important, because I have had people who purled one, slipped one, purled one, slipped, or slipped one, purled one across. But that is not what the row 2 is supposed to do. You're supposed to slip only the first one and then purl all the rest of the stitches across. So here's me purling all the rest of the stitches across. And then when you come to the last row of the 3, it will start with a single knit 1, followed by a slip 1. Sorry, a single slip 1, I can't talk. A single slip 1 followed by a knit 1. So it's a little bit different from row 1, and it is this row that you repeat. Row 3 is the one that you repeat. So there's my first 2 rows. It looks a little toothy, so that the contrast colors look like little teeth coming down into my sock, which is kind of a neat look. I really like her designs. All right, so again, you're going to slip the first stitch. We knitted it in the last, when we joined the yarn, but we're going to slip it now, and we're going to knit the second one. And then we're going to do that across the row. And when you continue with your sock, you will continue doing this sort of ribbed heel all the way until the heel flap is the correct number of inches for your size. And so that could be 2, 2.25, or 2.5 inches, depending on what size you're doing. And your slip stitches should always be lining up. You should be slipping the same. I found out this weekend that that is called the wale. So one stack of stitches is a wale. It's kind of like in corduroy. You have pinwheel or wide wale corduroy. That vertical line of stitches is a wale. So you want your stitches to stack up. The slip stitches will stack up over each other, and the knitted stitches will stack up over themselves. So that's the first 3 rows. And then I would go back and do row 2 next, and then row 3, row 2, row 3, until I had my desired number, ending having completed a row 2. So when you've done that, it looks like this. So see how there's like an elongated chain of stitches going up. It looks ribbed, but we never purled on the face of the fabric. So these are all knit stitches, but when you slip the stitch every other row, it elongates and makes it bigger. Okay, the back of that fabric looks almost honeycombed to me. It feels thicker. And the point of doing this kind of technique is to create a heel that's a little bit more durable. Okay, so this is done to the length that it's supposed to be. And you'll notice on the edge that the better light on the edge. If I can move my leg a little closer. The edge stitch has the appearance here of a chain going up. That's because we slipped those stitches, so they are larger and elongated like the slip stitches on the face of the fabric. And that's going to help us when we go to pick up our gusset. Okay? Any questions about the slip stitch for the heel flap? Great. All right, we're going to move on to the heel turn. And the heel turn is that magical part of a sock where you go from one direction and you make a 90-degree turn to create the bottom, to begin to create the bottom of the foot. So I'm going to demonstrate this and complete the heel turn. I may turn off the video so you don't have to watch all the knitting if you're watching the video later. Those of you live with me get to see the whole thing. And then I'm going to do the gusset pickup and the first round of decreasing. Okay, so on page 6 of the pattern, the heel turn begins row 1, and she writes, slip 1, knit 14 or 16 or 18 or 20, SSK, knit 1, and turn. And what we talked about this morning in Sock Club, and it was Elfrida who brought it up, is this takes you 1 stitch past the center. And it results in an unequal number of stitches on one side or the other. So it's not a perfectly centered heel. And Elfrida suggested that we do 2 stitches past the center and it would be a centered heel. And so I would like to suggest to you that you add 1 stitch to whichever number you're doing. So I'm doing 16, so I'm going to add 1 stitch to that. And don't forget that you're slipping 1 at the beginning. So when you count that number, the total number of stitches like if I was doing this pattern, I slip one and knit 14, I would, according to Summer Lee, have 15 stitches. What I'm suggesting is you slip one and knit 15 and you'll have 16 stitches on your right needle when you begin your heel turn. Similarly, if you're making the second size, you would have 18 stitches total, slip one plus 17, or slip one plus 18 plus 1 would be 20 stitches or 22 stitches. So what I'm suggesting is that you don't use an odd number to make the turn, that you use an even number, and you do that by adding 1 to any of those numbers. So let me show you. I slipped my first one here, and then I worked 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 more. 17, 2, 4, 16. So I'm going to add 1 more. My bobbin's stuck. Okay, I'm going to add 1 more stitch. And I'm going to count the stitches on my far side. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 stitches. So I've gone 1 more than she talks about, and I'm going to do an SSK. The SSK is normally done by slipping a stitch purlwise, slipping a stitch knitwise, slipping a second stitch knitwise, and working the 2 stitches together by taking the left needle into the fronts of the 2 slip stitches and working them together around the back. It makes a left leaning decrease, but it tends to have a somewhat elongated left side of the stitch. So this left side of the stitch tends to be, and that's the part that's right under my thumbnail, that tends to be a little bit big. So I want to show you a technique that I learned from Patty Lyons that allows you to make a somewhat more equal to a less elongated one. So the reason that you slip one knitwise, you slip another one knitwise, is that your stitches are like a horseshoe. And when you work a stitch, typically the right leg of the horseshoe is nearest to you. So when you slip it knitwise, you change that so that the right leg of the horseshoe is further from you. And it allows you to work so that the stitch can be twisted in a different direction. Patty Lyons, who is a wonderful teacher and wrote a book called The Knitting Bag of Tricks, which I love, talks about doing a SSK a little bit differently. So it's not SSK anymore, but you're going to slip one as if to knit. And then we called this the kimono sleeve maneuver. So if you've ever seen somebody wearing a kimono and they put both hands into the sleeves, so they tuck the left hand into the right sleeve and the right hand into the left sleeve. So that's kind of what we think this technique looks like. So all I've done so far is I've slipped this stitch knitwise from the first stitch knitwise from the left needle to the right needle. Now I'm going to put the left needle into that one stitch and the right needle into the back of the next stitch. Okay, so I have 2 stitches in the cross of my needles. I wrap the yarn around the back and knit them together, and it makes a little bit smaller left leaning decrease. So it's a little less prominent. So you can do an SSK if you don't want to do my new technique, you don't have to. But if you do this technique, it will make a slightly less prominent left leaning decrease. So it will match the knit 2 together, the purl 2 together, that's going to be on the right side. All right, so we've worked our stitches over. We've done the SSK, or our version of an SSK, the kimono sleeve SSK. We knit 1 more stitch, and we turn. At this point, I recommend that you count the stitches again to see how many you leave. 2, 4, 6, 8. Now I have 11. 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Hit one, enter. Did I lose a stitch?
That's what I have as well.
11.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'm, oh, we did it on a different size this morning. We had 13, so that's my problem. Okay, so now we're gonna slip the first stitch. So all you're gonna do with the yarn in front, because we're on the purl side, is put the right needle into the first stitch as if to purl and slip it off of the left needle. Then we're gonna purl 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to purl 2 together. So we just put the right needle into the next 2 stitches, starting with the stitch closest, going into the stitch after it, purlwise, wrapping them together and taking them off, purling 1 more stitch, and I'm going to count my remaining stitches, and I should have the same number. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. Yep. So I have 11 and 11. The way that she wrote the pattern, you have a different number, and so it's not a completely centered heel, and we decided that we wanted a centered heel. Okay, so let's keep going. Now I'm on
Sorry, 1 sec. Sorry, I'm pretty new. So when you say turn, you are literally taking it 180 and turning it like this.
I'm turning back to the other side.
Okay.
So
But you're not, but you're still going in the same direction in terms of the stitches that you're working.
No.
No, we have switched directions. Okay.
I've been switching directions. So the first time I worked over to here and I turned and went back.
Okay.
Knitwise, and now I'm turning again to go back knitwise. And what you'll see is that you slip that first stitch, you knit over to the gap that's created by your turn, which is 1 more stitch each time. So if you see the directions here, it says to turn. So you turn and go back the other way on the stitches in the middle, not at the edge. And notice that it says purl 5, knit 6, purl 7. Every time you do this, you'll be adding 1 to the number of stitches it takes to get to the other edge of the heel. So here I am, I've slipped 1. I'm going to knit 6. And that brings me at the edge of that turn of that gap. There we go. And now I'm going to do another SSK. So again, the SSK that I'm showing you is slip 1 as if to knit, put the left needle tip into the front of that stitch and the right needle tip into the back of the next stitch and work them together. Knit 1 more stitch and turn back. So there's my turn back. You slip that first stitch purlwise and work back to the gap. And you can feel the gap between your fingers. You can see the gap if you look at the stitches under your fingers on the left-hand side. Here it comes. So I stop when I have the one before the gap and the one after, and I purl those 2 together to close the gap. I purl one more, and then I turn back. And we're going to continue doing that. So slipping the first stitch, working in pattern, so working either a knit or a purl across to the other side of the gap until you have one stitch before the gap and one stitch after. I'm going to work my fancy SSK, one more. See what's happening right there? See that beginning of a turn in my direction? Slip one, work back to the other side of the gap. Now,
I have a question.
sure.
Why not just do knit two together?
It has a directional difference. Of knit two together is a right leaning decrease, and we're on the left side of the heel turn. So the left leaning decrease actually, here we go, follows the line of your heel turn. Do you see that?
Okay. Yeah.
And the knit two, the purl two together has a right leaning line.
Okay. But if you knit two together, it wouldn't do the same thing.
If you knit, this is the same as knit two together over here. Knit two together always leans to the right.
Okay.
So these decreases would look like they were going against.
Okay. You're right. Yeah, I gotcha. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anytime, Bernie. My yarn is all tangled up in my needles. Okay, so slip, work back over. I'm sorry this is going out of focus, but it's not, hopefully, too important. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about reinforcing the heel. So, we talked about how this is kind of a reinforced fabric, but the heel turn that we're doing is at the bottom, the base of the heel of the sock. And that's actually where mine wear. I don't know about you guys, but that's where I get a hole, is at the base of my foot. And so I just want to suggest that if you wanted to, you could double thickness do this if you didn't think that would be too confusing as you were doing these turns. You could add a strengthening thread. They sell wool that has nylon in it that can strengthen the heel of a sock or the toe of a sock. So you could use that. Or you could add, if you had a little bit of mohair. Mohair is a naturally strengthening fiber, and mohair and a silk mohair lace weight could be used just for these stitches, just for this turning point, and it would create a little bit of a pad at the base of your heel, and it would be much stronger. So I just want to say that there are ways of creating a stronger sock if you want to, by adding more fiber to the places where there's wear. Elfrida likes to actually work a patch as she's doing her socks. And so her patch she can use later. And we were teasing her that we wouldn't be able to find it. So we'll have to keep them at her house with her patches, so we know where they are. But a patch is a really good idea. You could just knit another little piece of stockinette fabric with your contrast color and use it later if you needed to patch these socks. It's like putting the extra button away when you're getting a new sweater and you have extra buttons, or sewing an extra button into the seam. I really would like this to stop being attached to my needle. You unattach, please. Not helping. Slip. So I'm almost to the edge, and then we're going to do the gusset. Does anybody have any questions about this part of the technique? Excellent. I taught a decreases and increases class recently, and I looked up that that decrease from Patty Lyons, and I was so tickled by it. She explains things really well. The book that I'm referencing is called Patty Lyons' Bag of Knitting Tricks, and it's just a wonderful book with lots of insight onto all kinds of things, from increases and decreases to better ways to cast on or bind off. And I think we sold all of the copies that we had of it in stock. So I can't sell it to you at the moment, but if you tell me you want one, I will be ordering more, and we will ship them out when we have them, or send, or have you come in and get them.
So this heel turn doesn't add height to the sock. It's strictly a turn.
So this heel turn, so the sock is now as tall as it will be. This is the bottom of my heel. And this part of it is coming forward. So now imagine the foot coming up out of this.
Okay, so there's a defined endpoint when you're finished with your heel turn, and that's when you will
have knitted as tall as your sock is going to be. So the leg, this length here,
yep,
is the determinant of how tall your sock is. The heel just runs, the slip stitch heel part that we did just runs along the back of your heel. And then from this point onward, you're working on the foot.
Okay. How do you know you're done with your heel turn when you get to the end here?
Yes. So I'm going to keep doing this until I've run out of stitches on the side. Oops, one more. So
okay, thank you.
I have 3 more stitches on this side. And slip one. So we're going to go right to the very, very end of our heel. And when we've done that, we'll count our stitches and make sure that we're in the same place. Slip one purlwise, knitwise. Keep saying purlwise, I'm crazy. Left needle in the front, right needle in the back. Work them together. Knit one more. So we'll be ending without the knit one at the end. So that's probably why she has the odd number for her turn. So it makes sense, but it doesn't have a centered, it's not a centered toe or a centered heel. So, you have permission to make modifications in any pattern if you choose to. And this is a modification I'm just suggesting. Purling 2 together and then purling 1 more. That leaves me with, whoops, 1 stitch. I'm going to go back, slip that stitch. Work all the way back to the other end. This is going to be the end of the contrast color for this part of the sock. I won't bring it back out until we're doing the toe. So I get to the last one. So on the last one, you won't have a knit one at the end when you turn. You'll just do the decrease and turn. So you'll slip that stitch. And work back to the other side.
No, I don't slip that stitch on the purl side, and then that way I don't have as big a gap.
Oh,
I saw that in somebody's technique.
very
Not-
cool.
Yeah, don't slip that last one and you won't have a big gap.
Cool. Okay, don't slip that last one. So here is my completed heel turn. And you'll see that my left leaning decreases line up on that side and it makes a crisp, almost folding line. And then my right leaning decreases are on this side. And Bernie says, don't slip the last 2 edge stitches. And we do what Bernie tells us. So we're going to not slip the last 2 edge stitches. Well, I slipped the one, but I'm not going to slip this one. So I'm going to knit across, and now we're going to get ready. So this is the last part of my gusset. Let's count our stitches. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So I have one less stitch than she did. She had an odd number of stitches when she ended. I have an even number of stitches, one less than she does. So the middle of this is my is going to be the beginning of my next round. So we could mark that now because it's kind of easy to see it now. So if you wanted to slip a marker in, it would be so good if I had a marker. You could put one in now and it would be where we're going to start counting. Ha! Have one. I have a great big pink marker. It's going to be lovely. So you could put a marker in here at the middle of your heel because we're going to be changing where the beginning of the round is.
So do you end this on with pearls?
So you
'Cause
want to, so you have finished on the beginning of a right side row. And then you're going to work across the right side row. You're going to knit back to the far side because that's where we're going to start picking up stitches for the gusset. Because we're going to start working in the round again. Okay.
So I'm putting the marker halfway through there, so it's going to be on the bottom.
On the
of my
bottom of the foot and the
foot.
middle of the heel.
Okay. Getting ready to,
So now so we've done the heel turn. Sorry, my puppy is barking at the cat. So now we're getting ready to start page 7 for the gusset. And we're going to pick up the stitches for the gusset. We're going to resume using our. Hold on 1 second. I've killed the dog. All right, so I'm going to resume with my working yarn. And I'm going to start by picking up the stitches along the side. Now, Elfrida likes to use her double pointed needles for this. And I can see the appeal of starting with your double pointed needles. Also, we could have started in the middle of this round and changed color there, but it's going to be easier to weave in my end here at this place where we've done the turn. And so it would be a little bit more noticeable as you wear the sock if you had to weave an end in the middle of your heel. Okay, so, I mean, there's some logic in doing it there in terms of where the color change in the beginning of the round is, but there's not logic if you think about cutting my contrast yarn. I'm going to unroll this edge or roll it back towards me, and you can see the face of those stitches look like little V's. And I want to take my right needle tip and pivot it to go into the first V underneath the stitch that I'm at. So that is here. So this is where Bernie says there's a gap. She's not wrong. There's a little bit, there's like 1 stitch height there. And so that could have been avoided maybe. But I'm going to put my right needle tip under both legs of the V at the edge of my heel flap. I'm going to wrap the working yarn around it as though to make a stitch, because that's what I'm doing. Sorry, wrong yarn. I'm going to wrap the working yarn, the main color yarn, around it. And then I'm going to work the next one. Again, I'm kind of turning with my fingers the stitches to see both legs of the V right there. And again, I take my tail of the new yarn and I just cross it over like that so that when I make the stitch, it's sort of locked in place. And I'm going to do that for each of the stitches along the edge. Of my contrast color slip stitch heel. I'm picking up all along this edge. Tell me if I go out of camera, sorry. It looks so dark. That's a little better. One of the reasons I like the Chaogu needles is they're very pointy and they make this picking up pretty easy for me. I find a duller or rounder tip is harder for me. Now, when you come to the top of the contrast, that's generally where you stop picking up stitches, but I always feel like there's a little bit of room at the top of the heel. At the top of the heel that you could pick up a couple more. So I'm just going to continue going into the center of each of these 2 stitches and pick up 2 more stitches to close the gap between the top of my the top of my heel flap and the first stitch on my instep, the first stitch of my top of my foot. So right now, this is a good place to count your stitches: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. Make a little note that you picked up 17 stitches. It's easier now than later. So however many stitches you pick up along your heel, you want to make a little note. Now, when you turn to work the instep stitches, if you're working magic loop, this is the point to change the position of the needles. If you're working DPNs, this is the position to add the instep needle. So you're changing needles here. And if you're doing on 2 needles, if you're working in the round on 2 needles, again, you're changing needles here. So the beginning of the instep, you want to push those stitches into the needle that they're on. If you're doing magic loop, we'll be pulling the other cable out to turn it to make these stitches be on the second half. So the second half is always exactly half, or the first half, whatever, the instep half is always going to be half of the stitches. But as you can see, I'm going to have way more than half of the stitches on the bottom of the foot. And that's how the gusset allows you to get your feet into a sock, because if it had to go into a sock that was just a tube, it wouldn't really be stretchy enough. It wouldn't really fit your feet the way a hand knitted sock fits your feet. We're not making tube socks. You can get those at Target. So now I'm just working across on my magic loop. Get can be a little fiddly as you get it all set up. I try to just, be in the zen of these are the stitches I'm working on and ignoring that cable that keeps popping up into my way on the back. It's like the puppy. And I'm going to get across all of those stitches, and then I'm going to pick up 2 stitches at the top after I turn my needle again. So when you get to the end of the instep stitches, if you're using DPNs, you would get your next needle out. If you're using if you're doing in the round on 2 needles, you would change needles here. And if you're doing magic loop, you are going to change here as well. Why do I have a tail there? Because I broke the yarn there. Okay. Because your yarn's in the wrong place when you start the gap. Okay, so I'm going to pull my needle here. So before I do that, I want to push my other needle into the stitches. That makes the loop as big as it can be. So I push that onto the other stitches, the heel stitches onto what's going to be my left needle. And then for magic loop, you pull this out, leaving as much of a loop as possible. I'm losing my ability to speak words. Okay, be careful if you cut your yarn here, the main color, that you do not knit with the tail. As you pick up these stitches, you want to continue working with the working yarn. You can weave the tail around the working yarn as you go. So again, I picked up 2 stitches right below the ones on the needle. So there's 1, there's 2. I'm going to pick up that stitch, and I've crossed that tail that was hanging out. Hold on. Yep. So I'm going to pick up a stitch here. I've crossed the tail over it to kind of tuck it away. And I'm going to pick up one below that. And I'll cross the tail over again, just to kind of secure it in between. And there's my 2 stitches in the main color section. Now I want to pick up 15 stitches along the edge. So I go under each V again and pick up 1 stitch for each V. So we placed a beginning of round marker. That doesn't mean that we move the needles at the beginning of the round. We want to move the needles at the edges of the instep. So I don't want to be confusing. The beginning of the round is just the beginning of counting for keeping track of your gusset decreases. Now, what if you pick up a different number on one side versus the other? It's okay. You don't have to rip everything back and start over if you don't want to, but you do have to decrease down to the correct number. It might mean you have one more decrease on one side than the other. And you'll see that Summerlee thinks that's perfectly fine, because that's how she resolves the issue with her heel turn being uneven, is having an extra decrease on one or the other side. So I'm right at the bottom. And so let's count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18. So I picked up an extra one. I'm okay with that. I'm going to just continue, but I'm going to keep a mental note that I have an extra one. To continue, I'm going to stay on the same needle If you're doing double points, you could use the break at the center to be the beginning of your round and not have a marker there. So because I'm working in the round magic loop, or if somebody's working in the round on 2 circular needles, you would want to have a marker here. But if you're working in the round on double points, this could be your next needle. And you wouldn't need a marker there because it would be open and it would fall out. All right, so this is the first round after the gusset was picked up. And you're going to work to the instep stitches. You're going to work until you're just before the instep stitches. And we are now on page 8 of the pattern. And we're going to work across I'm reading her thing. So we're decreasing our stitches back to the number that we started with, or if we're changing that number to make it bigger or smaller, the target number for our foot. And now we are doing our decreases before and after the instep. I'm going to pick up 1 extra on this side because I can. And then I will have the same number on both sides. So I'm just going to pick up 1 more stitch right there, wrap my tail around it. And now I have 18 on both sides. That's a little bit of wizardry. So that stitch is twisted. Oh, I apologize. Her beginning of round is not in the heel. Her beginning of round is at the end. It's here at the end of the heel turn stitches. So she says work. She says work across the front of the sock to the marker, slip the marker, knit 1, SSK, knit around to the 3 stitches before the end of the round, knit together, knit 2 together, knit 1, work an even round with no decreases. So I work to 3 stitches before the instep, and I'm going to do the knit 2 together, knit 1 there. And then I'm going to work to the other side of the instep and work the other decrease there and then finish the round. Slightly different from how she's got it laid out. Either way, I believe that the decreases are happening in the same place. And no decreases are ever happening on the top of the sock, the instep of the foot. So I'm just going to keep working. These are 32 stitches for my size. So this number never changes. The held stitches that we kept on half of the needle while we were doing our heel, these stitches never change number. And what our goal is to take the stitches that we've created on the bottom and get back to 32. So this is a good place to check the total number. I picked up 18 on each side, that's 36. And then I had 18 stitches on the bottom, I believe. So 36 plus 18 is 46, 50, or to 54. So I'm going to go from 54 back down. Okay, I'm at the end. Back down to 32. So I've got a lot of decreases to make. And now my decreases start here. I'm going to start with those 2 stitches. I'm changing the positions of my needles again because I'm at the end of my instep. So whichever method you're using, you're going to change your needle position. And you're going to knit 1. And in this case, you're going to do an SSK. So I'm going to do my fun SSK, the kimono sleeve SSK. And then I'm working back to the beginning of the round. And it's struggling a little bit here because of the length and the turn of these stitches. So it helps if you can get all of those stitches up onto the needle to make this go more smoothly. So they're all bunched up, but that actually makes it a little bit more smooth. Oh, what timing. All right. So once I get to the beginning of the round, this is where I will begin a round with no decreases. So I'll work all the way around with no decreases. And then when I come back to the beginning of the round, that resets my need to do decreases. And again, I do them before and after the instep stitches, which is slightly different from how Summerlee describes them. So I do them, if this is the beginning of the round, I do them at the end of the first needle and at the beginning of the first needle when I come back. Okay. So your homework is to get your, so at this point, you're working only in the main color. You're going to be decreasing until there's 32 stitches on the bottom needle and the top needle, and you're back to, or the same number on the bottom needle as the top needle, unless you are changing the total number of your stitches. And you're going to work that until you have worked across the foot to the place that you want to do your toe. And she starts hers in the same place that I do. She tries it on, and if the foot is covering her pinky toe, that's where she starts. And you can count those rows from here so that you can start the second sock in exactly the same place. But she tries her sock on, and if the foot covers her pinky toe, that's where she starts her toe. That's exactly what I do. So your homework is to get both socks to cover the pinky toe by March 4th, which is our next and our last session of Sock Club for the I'm So Basic sock. Any questions? All right. I am delighted to have you guys all with me today. Please tell me I started the recording again. I did.